My next guest is an internationally known speaker, conference speaker, author, television host, has spoken in churches and conferences all over the world. His name is Joe Amaral. And in fact, we have a little roll-in to kind of introduce him. So if you can go ahead and start that, let's welcome Joe Amaral. Let's welcome Joe Amaral. And Joe, thank you so much for being our guest tonight.
It's a pleasure, man.
Let me just read a little bit about who Joe is. For those of you that are not familiar with him, Joe is the author of Understanding Jesus, the devotional book called What Would Jesus Read? And his most recent book is called The Story in the Stars. He has served as the daily host of Canada's longest-running daily TV program, 100 Huntley Street. He was the teaching pastor at Portico Community Church in Ontario. In 2018, Joe founded the Christian Research Group, an organization that's committed to serving the local church and helping believers better understand and defend what they believe. He has traveled all over the world, speaking in churches and conferences and many, many other venues. And if I read this right, you just returned from your 42nd trip to Israel.
You read it correctly. Yeah, just 2 weeks ago, man. Trip number 42.
Wow, that in itself is impressive. Well, Joe, thank you again for being with us on Celebrate tonight. And I have been looking forward to this interview. I'm so excited about it. And so I'm just going to get right to the point.
Okay.
Okay. You know, when
we have 3 hours, right?
Yeah, we'll go as long as we need to.
Awesome.
You know, when you look at the heavens and you see the stars and you see the constellations and you know, just all of the things in the universe, and you're aware of the fact that man has studied and observed the stars for centuries, trying to understand what the message is, because it's too organized. There's too much structure for it to be random. And yet it seems like that the heavens are trying to tell us something and man is trying to understand what that is. You have the message. You're in your book, you talk about the story in the stars. Well, let me ask you, what is the story in the stars?
Man, you said so many great things in what you just finished talking about there, Tim. That there's so much design in the heavens, there's so much repetition, there's so much perfection, and to chalk it up to chaos and to be unorganized and unguided, it seems like it's highly implausible, it's just impossible. To think that there's 48 constellations in the sky, and to think that thousands of years ago, one culture in one part of the world, the Egyptians, looked at the sky and they saw 48 signs. Okay, so that's pretty impressive, 48 signs. Then 1,000 years later, the Chinese, they come up with a chart, and they never talk to the Egyptians, and they have, guess what, 48 signs. And then you go to the Babylonians, and then you go to the Hebrews, and you go all over the world. And everybody has not only the same 48 constellations, but they use even the exact same stars to make out the outline of the constellations. And for me, a pattern began to emerge. If you look at just one piece, it looks like just a small part of a puzzle, and you can't see the whole picture. But once you take all 48 pieces of the puzzle and you start to cement them in, like, oh my goodness, there really is a story in the stars. You know, in Psalm chapter 8, verse 3, it says that God not only named and created the stars, but he's the one who set them in place.
Wow.
And I said, hang on a second, God. You know, in the book, you know, I mention and I talk about the two main theories. People believe that, you know, people argue and talk about, you know, when did the universe start and how did it all begin? That's not what I'm interested in. I'm a pastor, I'm a theologian. My question is why? Why did God do it? You know, why did God put up these images in the sky? And if he did, what is he trying to tell us? Well, as we start to study these patterns in the sky, a story clearly emerges. And the Lord took me to Psalm chapter 19, verses 1 and 4. And it's a verse that people watching at home right now, they know it, right? The heavens declare the glory of God. And I bet you some of them even have it framed, and it's up in, you know, up in their home somewhere. But the verse doesn't end there. And this is where it's really crucial, because the heavens are declaring the glory of God. Okay, so everything that exists, the heavens is the universe. Everything in the universe exists to declare the glory of God. So we've got to figure out what the glory of God is, because whatever it is, everything exists to declare it, to lift it up. So then you keep reading in the verse, and it says that the heavens not only declare, the heavens proclaim, they pour forth speech, and night after night, the heavens are revealing knowledge without using a single word.
Wow.
And I said, hang on a second. All of creation is revealing knowledge about the glory of God without saying a single word. How do you say something without saying anything? A picture is worth 1,000 words. And so I began to study these pictures, these constellations, these signs that God had put in the sky. And so I began to ask myself, listen, what is the glory of God? Because whatever it is, the universe exists to declare it. And we asked the wrong question, because the glory of God isn't a what. It's not a thing. According to the scriptures, the glory of God is a person. In Hebrews chapter 1, verse 3, it says, the Son, S-O-N, the Son, Jesus, is the radiance of God's glory. So Jesus is the glory of God, and the heavens declare the glory of God. Where are the heavens declaring? Jesus. We should expect to find him in his life, his birth, his death, his resurrection. We should see them in the signs of the sky.
Wow. So now let me ask this, because you know, being a pastor, the moment you start talking about the zodiac and things of that nature, you know, Christians get real hesitant, because we have been taught historically that it's antithetical to what we believe as Christians. But you're saying that the message of the stars is the proclamation of who Jesus, the Son of God, is.
Absolutely.
How do these two things coexist?
Well, we hear about the zodiac, and our skin crawls a little bit. You know, I travel into churches all over the world, and I say the Z word in church, and I swear somebody's touched the temperature in the church, because it just drops right away. Everybody's like, what did he say, the zodiac? The zodiac today has a totally different meaning than what it did in antiquity. The zodiac simply means it's the constellations in their apparent motion in a circle. That's all it is. And so God creates these images. Think of it as the ultimate PowerPoint. It never stops circling. Month after month, year after year, night after night, these images are circling. And it really floored me as I began to read through the New Testament. Not just in the Old, like in Job chapter 38, God says, can you bind the chains of the Pleiades? Can you loosen Orion's belt? And he says, can you cause the Mazzaroth or the constellations to move? God is using names. He's using the signs of these constellations. He's naming them by name. But it wasn't until I got to the New Testament in Luke, and I heard Jesus talking about the signs in the sky, and it blew my mind. Now, some people are going to double check the verse, so let me give you the right one, okay? It's Luke chapter 21, verse 25. Jesus is talking about the end times, and people are asking him, when will these things happen, and when is all this stuff going to go down? And Jesus says, there will be what? Signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars. What are made up of suns, moons, and stars? The constellations. In fact, Jesus said, look to the heavens and you will see the sign of the Son of Man coming on the clouds. So the difference between the zodiac, the difference between looking at, what's the word for when we look at the zodiac to tell us stuff about ourselves?
The
horoscope. Okay, here's the difference. The moment you start looking at the stars so that they can reveal something about you, you've crossed the line.
Wow.
The whole point of creation, the whole point of the stars is to point us to the bright and morning star,
I got to stop you. I got to stop you because that's too good. You've got to hear that. I want to repeat it one more time. He said the moment you start looking at the stars to find out about yourself, what it says about you, you've missed the message. The story in the stars is not about you. It's not about predicting your future or identifying what type of a person you are. The story in the stars is to reveal who Jesus is.
That's right.
Wow, this is mind-boggling, and I know people are watching. You know, you're captivated by this probably as much as I am, because all of this says there's too much design for this just to be random.
Absolutely.
There's got to be a creator that's sending a message to his creation.
I mean, think about how much God loves us, that he didn't want a single person anywhere in space and time to ever miss the message. So whether you can speak Hebrew or Greek or Chinese or Portuguese or whatever, it doesn't matter what language you can or cannot speak. If you can look up and if you can see the signs, you can see the story. And the story is, I love you. I love you. I'm sending my son. He's coming. He's going to die for you. He's going to be born of a virgin. He's going to come back for you. And that entire message is in the sky, as it should be, because the heavens declare the glory of God, who is Jesus.
Well, you know, this time of the year, of course, in just about all of our Christmas trees, we have the star.
Yeah.
And, you know, we trace that back to the story of the wise men following the star to where the Christ child was born. Is that another example of the stars, the heavens declaring the glory of God, and the firmament showing his handiwork? What's the significance of the Star of Bethlehem?
It's absolutely significant. Right back in the beginning, God cements why he creates creation. He says that in Genesis 1:14 that the sun, the moon, and the stars will serve as signs to mark holy days. And it's two words in English, but in the original Hebrew, the word is moed, like feasts, like Passover, Pentecost, Feast of Trumpets, Tabernacles. God said, when those days on the calendar appear, he goes, you can expect to find a sign in the sky. We have apps today. We have star maps. We can look and know exactly when these days take place, but they didn't know that in antiquity. So God says that for holy days, for important days, I'm going to put signs in the sky. And absolutely, the birth of the Son of God, the birth of the Savior of the world, you can guarantee it's going to be filled with signs. Now, how much time do I have? Because I can do this in 4 hours, I can do it in 4 minutes.
We've got about 10 minutes.
Oh, 10 minutes. You should have said so. Let's have some coffee brought in here. We have lots of time. The night of Jesus' birth is filled with astronomical phenomena. And we should expect that, because God said that he created all of creation to declare the glory of God. The sun, moon, and stars will serve as signs to mark holy days. And then later on, Jesus says, look, and there you will see the sign. So what was the sign? These magi, these magi, these astronomers from the east, who were they, and why would they traverse a massive, massive desert in order to follow a star that they knew nothing about, to a country they knew nothing about, to see the birth of a king they knew nothing about? So we've got to get a little bit of context. And for me, it all started with a dream. And I don't dream a lot, but when I get them, they're usually doozies. And I woke up from this dream, and I shared it with my dear wife, who's here in the studio today. And I said, honey, you got to listen to this dream I had last night. And I told her the dream, and she said, honey, please don't tell anybody that dream. It's really weird. I said, I know, but I just feel like God is telling me something. And when I woke up, God said to me, he said, Joe, I want you to check the constellations, because in the dream I saw a woman, and she was clearly up in the sky. And I said, a woman in the sky? What in the world is that? And she looked distressed to me. I can't explain it, but she looked distressed. And then she kind of faded away, and it was like another scene came in, and there was this large dragon, and he looked really angry and obnoxious, and I knew that he wanted to harm the woman. So then he disappeared, and I woke up. I said, Lord, what is this? Check the constellations. But God, the constellations, aren't those symbols that people go to every morning? The horoscopes? Check the constellations. But God, are you sure this is you? Check the constellations. And I said, Lord, I know this voice. This is the voice that told me to go to Bible college. This is the voice that said, marry that woman. This is the I know this is you, but how can it be that you're telling me to check the constellations? And so I said, okay, I'm going to take a risk. I'm going to check these constellations. As I'm looking at the 12 signs, only one is a female. So I saw this female in the sky, and that's the constellation of Virgo. So Virgo is in the sky. And then beside her was the great dragon. There's another constellation called Draco. And I said, whoa, hang on a second. And then I go to Revelation chapter 12, and there it is. A great sign appeared in the heaven. And he sees these two visions. And the first is of a woman. And she's clothed with the sun, and the moon is under her feet, and she has a crown of 12 stars. But then a dragon appears, and he's furious, and he's frustrated, and then he swings his tail, and a third of the stars fell out from heaven. And I'm like, what in the world is John seeing? And so the woman, some people would say that she could represent the church, or the Holy Spirit, or Israel, or the dragon could be Herod, Nero, the Romans, or the devil himself. But then when God said, check the constellations, and I said, what if John was actually seeing constellations in the night sky? After all, he's in the island of Patmos. There's zero light pollution. He can see the sky like nobody's business. It must have been so clear. And then I started to wonder, well, if he's seeing the constellation of Virgo in the sky and she's wearing the sun, that means the sun is passing through that constellation. So wouldn't you know it, you can get an app. There's an app for that. I think that's a slogan. I said, show me the sky over Greece in the 1st century. Show me when Virgo is in the sky. Now show me when the sun is passing through the constellation. Oh my goodness, there it is. Now at the same time, show me if the moon kind of passes under the feet of the constellation. Wouldn't you know it, there's a day.
Wow.
Virgo is in the sky. The sun is passing through. The moon comes under her feet at the exact same time. And more than that, Draco, the great dragon that John saw, he's flinging a third of the stars from the heaven. How can you do that? Unless you know that as we're going around in our orbit and we're seeing a different part of space, for 3 days a year, the constellation of Draco passes through the dust debris of an old comet, and as that constellation passes through and we get a meteor shower, it looks like the stars from the heavens are falling towards the earth, and it was coming from the constellation of Draco.
Wow.
On the same day. So to John, a third of the stars were being flung out of the heaven. And this all happened on the first day of the Hebrew calendar called Tishri, Tishri 1. Now that day means nothing to you. It's gonna in a second. Now let's pan over to the Magi. They're watching, it says they were following a star. In antiquity, they didn't know the difference between a star and a planet. They just saw bright objects in the sky. And planets were able to move, of course, and because they were able to move, they were perceived as more powerful. So they were called the kings of the heavens. And there's one planet that's the largest of them all, and we know that's Jupiter. And Jupiter, because it was so large, was called the King of Kings. Now watch this. Jupiter does a motion called retrograde. It's the apparent reverse motion of a planet based on our orbit. You ever pull into a parking spot at the mall, and you pull in, and they pull out beside you, whoa, and you think you're moving still? That's called retrograde, the apparent motion. And so Jupiter began on its orbit like it usually does, and then it kind of stops, and it goes back this way. That's called retrograde. And from our perspective, it looks like it's making a circle or a halo or a crowning effect. And it did it over one star and one star only in the heavens, over a star called Regulus. And Regulus means little king. Regulus is in the constellation of Leo, which is the constellation of the king. So the King of Kings created a crown over the kingly star in the kingly constellation. Guess what day? Tishri 1.
Wow.
The woman, the sun, the moon, Draco flicking the tails, the Magi following the King of Kings, making the crown. It's all on Tishri 1. Why is Tishri 1 so important? Because that's called the Feast of Trumpets. In ancient times, when a king was about to be installed, it was on the first day of Tishri. You would sound 100 trumpets to announce the birth or the coronation of the new king. Here's Jesus, the King of Kings, on the night that he's born. When Israel and the ancient world is waiting for the king to be announced, that's when God announced his son. You see, that's what the star was. It was a compilation of many things. And so God uses creation, like he said, the sun, the moon, and the stars, to declare the glory of his son, Jesus of Nazareth. And that's why I can look at the stars and not feel like I'm doing anything bad, because I'm honoring God, I'm lifting up Christ. And right now, I know there are people watching this show who have been stuck and caught in all that astrology and all that horoscope stuff, and they're being convicted right now, because the stars aren't for them. The stars are to point us towards Christ. And I pray that every person who reads this book, who hears the sound of our voice today, Tim, that they'll turn from this ungodly practice, and instead they'll turn to Jesus, who is the bright and morning star.